So with that, I am officially welcoming you again to the webinar from WWF and the One Planet City Challenge on setting targets based in science. What we aim in this webinar is really to share information with you, our cities, on how to set these targets and why it's important to set them. We have very special guests with us today that we hope that they will give you information and that they will inspire you to engage with this type of action in your climate action plans. This is a webinar based on our One Planet City Challenge, the OPCC, which is a friendly biannual competition that aims to inspire cities to take climate action. And just for you to know, we will be opening for you to join in the CDP clay track in April. So then you're very welcome to join us there. Yes, we have a very special agenda. So we are going to start with the introduction to science-based targets for cities from Dr. Arminel Lovell from CDP. Arminel, she's a doctor in climate change science. She is the Senior Technical Manager in Cities, States and Regions at CDP. Then we will follow with a zoom into the methodology of the OPCC on how to set science-based targets, our alignment, our 1.5 alignment method, and this would be led by our great Gara Trujillo from WWF Cities from our tech team. And after we will open for questions from all of you, and we will, then we will have the panel after this for city guests, where Miika will join us from Turku, and then Meretoja Guerrero will be joining us from Lovell. So thank you all of our guests for joining us. Thank you for being part of this session. And I just want to check with our co-hosts to please help me check that we are actually recording the session. But yes, after the panel, we will have questions and then we will have final remarks. So I left you in the very great hands of Dr. Arminel Lovell, and thank you once again, Arminel, for joining us here today.
Thanks, Andrea. And I just want to check, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Yeah, so thanks, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. So in this part of the webinar, I will provide an overview to science-based targets for cities, incling why science-based targets are important, what makes up the science-based targets. I think somebody is, yeah, thank you, sorry. What are the key principles of science-based target setting? I'll provide an introduction to a range of different methodologies that cities can use to set a science-based target. And then I'll finish off with some words on how cities participating in WWF's One Planet City Challenge can report their targets through CDP at Clay Track in 2023 and future directions for science-based targets for cities' work. So the latest IPCC climate reports show that time is running out for the world to reduce emissions and adapt to climate change. Over 3 billion people live in situations that are highly vulnerable to climate change, and humans and nature are already facing severe climate impacts at 1.1 degrees of global warming. In the last decade, global emissions were still increasing. So to stay within 1.5 degrees, the latest science shows that global CO2 emissions need to peak by 2025, reduce 48% by 2030 relative to 2019 levels, and reduce to net zero by 2050. Next slide, please, Andrea. So why should cities set science-based targets? So cities are responsible for 70% of global emissions, and therefore they have a major part to play in achieving net zero emissions on a global scale. While some cities already have climate targets, in the past, they have not been able to ensure that they are aligned with the latest science and ensure that they represent a fair share of emissions reductions. Therefore, science-based targets define the level of action needed from each local government and city, which gives cities confidence to plan concrete climate action that will deliver their share of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. Science-based targets also help cities quantify and track their progress towards their targets. And by setting an ambitious science-based midterm emissions reduction target, this will help it make it easier for cities to reach their long-term net zero goals. Next slide, please, Andrea. The Science-Based Targets Network is a group of over 50 organizations which has been established to develop the tools and approaches needed for cities and businesses to set science-based targets for all Earth systems. So this is not just for climate, but also for nature, including water, biodiversity, land, and oceans. And the Science-Based Targets for Cities work has been led by the core city partners of the Science-Based Targets Network, who are CDP, ICLEI, C40 Cities, the Global Covenant of Mayors, World Resources Institute, and WWF. And the aim of this group is to build consensus and develop a harmonized approach on science-based targets for cities. They also aim to develop the tools and approaches needed for cities to set science-based climate targets. They support cities to set science-based targets, and the group also reviews targets reported to platforms such as CDP ICLEI track against 1.5 degree alignment. Next slide, please, Andrea. So what are science-based targets for cities and what do they include? So a science-based climate target is a measurable and actionable target to reduce citywide emissions. It represents a city's fair share of the emissions that are needed to reduce on a global scale. It represents the city's fair share of emissions that need to be reduced on a global scale to halve emissions by 2030 and to reach global net zero by 2050. And to have a science-based target, a city must have both a long-term net zero target by 2050 at the latest and a 1.5 degree aligned midterm target or interim target to be achieved in the next decade. Next slide, please, Andrea. So there are multiple approaches that cities can take to set a science-based targets. However, science-based targets should abide by the following 3 principles. So they should be science-driven, led by the latest climate science, and aligned with the Paris Agreement and IPCC special reports of global warming of 1.5 degrees. They should take equity into account. So a science-based target represents a fair share of global emissions reductions, taking into account that cities have different historical contributions to atmospheric emissions levels and different socio-economic contexts. And finally, science-based targets should be complete. So targets should be robust and comprehensive, taking into account citywide emissions from a variety of sources, so at least scope 1 and 2 emissions and multiple greenhouse gases. Next slide, please, Andrea. So in 2020, a group of methodologies were evaluated by the Science-Based Targets Network's core city partners against the 3 principles of science-based targets that I mentioned on the previous slide. So science basis, equity, and completeness. And these methodologies were also evaluated for their usability. So how easy are they for cities to use? And these methodologies are C40 Cities Deadline 2020 methodology, the Tyndall Center methodology, and WWF's One Planet City Challenge methodology, which Gara will go into in more detail later on in the webinar. These methodologies are all fit for purpose and meet the principles of science-based targets and can be used by cities to set science-based targets. However, they may be more or less suitable depending on each city's context and needs. And I'll cover this in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. For more information on these methodologies and how to use them, please read the Science-Based Target Network's Science-Based Climate Targets, a Guide for Cities. There's a screenshot of the guide on this slide, and we can probably share a link to the guide after this webinar. Next slide, please, Andrea. So the first methodology, C40 Cities Deadline 2020 methodology, was originally developed for and applied to C40 Cities, which is a global network of some of the largest cities in the world. The methodology provides an emission reduction trajectory based on 4 city typologies and indicates 2030 and 2050 targets. So each city is assigned to one of 4 emission reduction trajectories, which start from 2015 and go all the way out to 2050. And these trajectories are based on GDP and per capita emissions. All 4 trajectories expect cities to reach net zero emissions by 2050, but each typology represents a different pathway for cities to get there, depending on their GDP and per capita emissions. So the first trajectory is steep decline. This is for cities that have high GDP and high emissions. They're expected to reduce emissions most rapidly, starting from now. The second trajectory is steady decline, and this is for cities with high GDP but low emissions. They're also expected to reduce their emissions from now, but at a steadier decline to the steep decline cities. We have a trajectory which is called early peak, and this is for cities with low GDP but high emissions. These are expected to peak their emissions in the next few years and then reduce down to net zero. And then finally, late peak cities are cities with low GDP and low emissions, and they're expected to peak their emissions at a later date and then also reduce down to net zero. The benefits of this methodology are that it's simple to use and requires only a few data points, so just GDP and per capita emissions for your city, and it provides year-by-year emission reduction trajectories. And in terms of which context it's most suitable for, it was originally developed for C40 cities, and cities within that network can access it easily. Cities that are not part of C40 cities network should contact C40 for more information about the methodologies and to access the emission reduction trajectories. Next slide, please, Andrea. The second methodology is the Tyndall Center Carbon Budget Tool, and this provides annual carbon budgets for CO2 emissions from energy and also a target year to reach net zero. So the methodology starts with a global CO2 budget that is aligned with a well below 2 degrees and pursuing effort to limit 1.5 degree scenario. And then it translates the global budget down to national carbon budget and then down to local carbon budgets for individual cities. The benefits of this methodology is that it's robust and based on academically peer-reviewed methodologies and provides year-by-year emission reduction trajectories, and is strongly suitable for UK cities. But yes, it only is most suitable for cities with the main emission source that is energy. So it covers the budget only covers CO2 emissions from electricity use and heating and transport and industry. I think I'm running out of time, and apologies for this, so I'll keep going on. So the third methodology is WWF's One Planet City Challenge methodology, which Gara will run through in more detail in the next part of the slide. So this builds on Deadline 2020's methodology and provides 2030 and 20 per capita emissions reductions targets. The benefits of this methodology is that it's easily accessible and simple to use and globally applicable for all city types across the world. However, in terms of where it's most suitable, it only provides 2030 and 2050 targets, so it's not suitable for setting targets in other years. And I'll just quickly finish with the next slide. Cities participating in WWF's One Planet City Challenge are required to report their targets through CDP ICLEI Track in 2023. This is the reporting platform co-hosted by CDP and ICLEI. The key areas relevant to reporting your targets are governance and assessment and targets in the CDP ICLEI track questionnaire. And cities can report different types of targets through this platform, including base year absolute emission targets, fixed level targets, base year intensity targets, and baseline scenario targets. And there is guidance in the questionnaire and on CDP ICLEI Track website available to help you report your targets, including guidance on how to report SBTs and example responses. I have one more slide, but Andrea, if I've run out of time, we can pass that one by and I can just provide some notes on it.
I think, unfortunately, we have to pass to Gara.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arminel. This is very, very insightful. And then with that, I let the word to Gara.
Yes, thank you so much, Arminel, for that detailed presentation. Yeah, so I'm just going to now go a bit more into detail about the One Planet City Challenge 1.5 alignment method. Next. So basically, next slide, Andrea, please. Basically, what we do is we evaluate the targets that cities report, and we compare them to science-based targets that reflect a city's fair share of the Paris Agreement, which includes this idea of not exceeding global warming of 1.5 degrees. So basically, the OPCC 1.5 alignment method directs cities to achieve a net zero emissions by 2050. Next slide. So climate change is nothing new, and as Arminel was saying, the evidence is irrefutable that we must stay within 1.5 degrees warming threshold to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change, both to social systems and to natural systems. And this is particularly important to cities because the effects of climate change are often exacerbated in cities, especially when it comes to temperature increases. So we have very clear information about the scale of emissions reductions that must take place and the urgency of doing so. So in terms of the scale, we must reach net global zero emissions to limit global warming at any level. And the amount that we emit until reaching that zero is what will determine the amount of warming that we experience. So then the urgency becomes clear that the earlier we reach zero, the more likely it is that we stay within the 1.5 degrees of warming. And the figure on the slide, which is taken from the IPCC special report on global warming of 1.5, shows how faster CO2 reductions, which are in the blue area, result in a higher probability, excuse me, of limiting global warming to 1.5. And something that is not included in this slide, but it's very relevant, is the importance of having interim targets to ensure that we stay on track for achieving that long-term target. Next slide, please. Great. So how the method works, the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees of global warming provided a systematized way of comparing different pathways or scenarios that can limit median warming to 1.5 by the end of the century, which is our long-term stabilization goal. But there are many different pathways to reach that end goal. So the OPCC 1.5 alignment method uses one of those scenarios, which is the low overshoot scenario. And this is because it has the least overshoot. And what that means is that basically, based on this scenario, temperatures are likely to stay below 1.5 degrees and only surpassing that 1.5 degree threshold lightly before stabilizing at the end of the century. So we are aware that there are different ways to reach net zero, and that is why we emphasize that the method is not a prescription, but rather a guidance for cities. So having said that, the OPCC 1.5 alignment method requires cities to have a midterm target and a long-term target for their direct and indirect emissions. Next slide, please. So the long-term target, cities must reach net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest. As for the midterm, the interim target represents sort of a valid, measurable way for us to know that we are on track to meeting that long-term goal. And the requirement that we have is to reduce per capita emissions in line with a reduction of 50%. However, our method aims to give cities a common but differentiated pathway based on cities' capacities and their development level. And here is where the Human Development Index comes in. That's what we use. So the Human Development Index, HDI factor, modifies that midterm target, providing a range between 25 to 65% of per capita emissions reductions, so depending on the city. And this is where equity is integrated. And as Arminel kind of pointed out, the OPCC method focuses on one interim target, but ideally cities would have targets every sort of 5 to 10 years for more transparent accountability. Next slide, please. So the method is applicable to any type of city, and it requires 3 data inputs, including the emissions baselines from 2018, the population values from 2018 and the projection to 2030, and then the National Human Development Index. Next slide, please. And for the details of the method, including the formulas, you can find more details in the links that are provided in the presentation, which we will share with you after the webinar. Next slide, please. And I will go on to the implications of the OPCC 1.5 alignment method now. Next slide. There are several advantages and disadvantages to every method. And here I just want to highlight a couple of them for the OPCC 1.5 alignment method. So unlike other methods, our method focuses on specific points of reference in time rather than pathways that cities can follow. Nonetheless, it still serves as a benchmark to review targets. And perhaps because of that, it makes the method quite simple and easy to communicate. Then there is a clear and direct link to referenceable IPCC data, specifically the special report on 1.5 degrees of global warming. So the method is science-driven and it makes for a very robust method. The method is applicable to all types of cities, although there is a caveat that using the National Human Development Index as a correction factor can oversee sort of intra-national differences. But here, I just really want to emphasize that the method is not a sort of yes or no box that you can tick whether we're aligned or not, but rather it should be used as a guidance or as a reference for cities to know that they are on track to meeting that long-term net zero target. Next slide, please. And finally, all of our OPCC participants receive a strategic feedback report in early 2024, in which an element of the report is to illustrate how your targets, cities' targets, compare to the reference targets calculated by the OPCC that reflect a city's fair share of the Paris Agreement. And with that, I am finished. So Andrea, I don't know if your hand was up to give me a cue that I was going over time, or that maybe we can start with our panel discussion.
Yes, exactly. It was about being over time. We had in this moment a moment to have questions from the audience, but unfortunately, because of time, we will go to the panel. And then I leave the word to you, Gara, and we will take questions from the audience. Please write them right now in the chat if you have them, and we will pick them up as well while we go along the panel or at the end of it. So the panel. We're going to have, as I mentioned before, Miika from Miika Meretoja. I'm sorry for the mispronunciation, from the city of Turku. He's a senior specialist, climate and environment policy. And Mercedita Guerrero from city of Dipolog. She's the city environment and natural resources officer. Thank you very much again, both of you, for being here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just to let you three have the spotlight. Gara would be moderating.
Great, thank you so much, and very excited to have you both here. Andrea, do you think you can pin Mercedita as well on the screen so that everybody can have a good look at who's talking? Yeah, so I would like to start with Miika to ask you a question. I understand that you have been in the city of Turku administration for many years, and I cannot help but ask a bit about the story of Turku's mitigation targets. So how have your targets changed from sort of the first plan, I believe it was in 2009, to your current target of achieving carbon neutrality by 2029, which, if I do maths correctly, it's only 6 years away. So how easy has it been to change that ambition over time?
So, hello everyone, and indeed we have been working with climate issues for a long time, and in every council period, actually, the level of ambition has increased. And our first decent climate plan was indeed approved in 2009, and it was by that time aligned with the European Union's policy to reduce emissions 20% by 2020 compared to 1990 level. And the work started quite successfully, and after a few years of work, we were able to make more specific scenarios and set our first climate neutrality or carbon neutrality target to 2040. And maybe now, looking back in time, both targets seem quite modest actually, and we actually achieved more than 55% reduction by 2020, and now indeed aiming at carbon neutrality in 2029, which is the 800-year anniversary of city of Turku.
Sorry, muted. That's really great to hear. Yeah, and super interesting how a big chunk of the reductions have already been happening, which is important. And so now I would like to ask Mercy something that we haven't really discussed so far in the presentations, and it is the conditions that cities have to meet certain targets. So for example, the targets will only be met if there is a decarbonization of the electricity grid, which is outside of the direct control of the jurisdiction administration. So my question is, how is your administration working to ensure that those conditions that you reported for meeting your targets do take place, and what type of cooperation is needed for that? I think you're muted, Mercy.
Hello, everyone. For the prologue, for matters we believe we have influence, we already started coordinating or lobbying with concerned agencies, offices, or organizations. But for aspects beyond our control, just what you have discussed, we rely the effective implementation of the policies of the national government, like for example, the implementation of the Renewable Energy Act, which requires local power utilities to shift from non-renewable to renewable energy sources. So if the national government are successful, we in the local level will also benefit. So we will have cleaner energy.
Great. Yeah, very important. And I just maybe can say very briefly that if anyone from the audience has any questions that they would like to ask Miika or Mercy, please do put them on the chat and let us know. But yeah, following on what you were saying, Mercy, maybe this transitions well into my next question, which is, and I would perhaps invite both of you to answer this question, and it is, how has it been to involve other levels of government or citizens in support of your targets? And has there been anything that has helped in prioritizing these ambitious targets within the administration work? I don't know if who of you would like to go first?
I'll share first.
Great, Mercy.
For the prologue, I think it was not hard. It is not hard for us to engage our different levels of government and the private sector to support our targets, because they are already aware of the threats of climate change and the need to act. the challenge of the city government now is how effective and efficient are we to keep the ball rolling to achieve the targets.
Yeah, that's very important work. It's maybe where the real work comes in, right? After those targets have been set,
Yes.
how to achieve them. Yeah, on to you, Miika.
Yes, for us also it has been easy. It's partly because our work has been successful and proven profitable and also good for environment and a lot of positive experiences have already been proven, and so it's easy to get more people involved, and so but it's a long-term task, of course.
Of course, yeah, great. Yeah, thank you so much for those answers. And perhaps something that we could be interesting for other cities to know is how did you integrate those targets within your climate work? Is it something that where the target comes first and then the planning of actions and strategies comes after, or is this simultaneous work that is happening constantly, or yeah, how is this for both of your cities?
Well, if I start, well, it's more or less simultaneous, I think. So targets and actions are all the time cheering on each other, and it's a constant dialogue with the society. And so actually our climate plan nowadays is constantly updating, so we are all the time developing new climate measures, and with a dialogue with the companies and other parts of the society.
Perhaps that's also how it's sort of, it comes naturally to update the ambition of targets if the actions that are being done to achieve that that target are sort of giving results, right?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. What about for Dipolog, Mercy?
For Dipolog, I think we already have climate actions for the past years. We just don't know that we have contributed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but we're targeting. We did it in 2021 during our second participation, second cycle of during our second cycle participation of the OPCC. So it was only in 2021 that we set our science-based target. So what we did early this year, we revisited our climate mitigation plans, updated this plan to be responsive to the sectoral reduction targets that we have set out. This also include determining performance metrics that will guide us in our implementation and to show us how we are faring with our targets.
Great, yeah. And perhaps something that comes up now, because in the case of Dipolog, I know you have quite an ambitious 2030 target.
Yes.
Can you maybe describe it a little bit and how that midterm target, how it is supporting the work to achieve your long-term target to achieve a net zero city by 2050?
Yeah, our target is really very ambitious. It's a 75% reduction. We set it at 75 because we would like to align to our nationally determined contributions, which was set in 2021 at 75%. So our 2030 target plays a vital role in achieving our net zero target, because aiming high target in 2030 will not only significantly contribute to the 1.5 degrees target, but also set the pace for our climate actions. It signals urgency for us and our stakeholders to do impactful climate initiatives.
Yeah, very important.
Gara,
So, yes.
sorry, we have a question from the chat. I don't know if you've seen it.
Aha. A question from Sabina.
Yes.
Great, yes. So the question reads, for the cities that are totally new to science-based targets, do you have any tips of what is good to start with, or yeah, how to best start with the work to get it to work well? Big question.
Yes, and not an easy question to answer. Of course, it's important to just start the work and learn by doing so. But as I said, now looking back in time, maybe we experts are even too careful and doubtful, and so high ambition is good, and it's always surprising how willing the other partners are to join the work, and so just set the ambitious target and shout it loud. So that's a good starting point.
Great, just jump into it.
Yeah.
Mercy, what about you? Do you have any comments to that question?
For the LGU setting in the Philippines, I think we need to get the political will of our city mayor, because everything will follow. It will follow without the support of the mayor. Our job will not be that efficient, successful, or we will. Yeah, the mayor is very important in our work.
Yeah, great. And perhaps following from, oh, Andrea, another question?
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up on what you're saying, Mercy, from the political will of the mayor. I just wonder how that process went, if it's possible to share a little bit more. If it was the mayor saying like we have to do the science-based targets, or just from his climate ambition, he followed the lead that you were having, and then I don't know if you can share a little bit of how that collaboration worked.
Yeah. During the 2021 OPCC cycle, our time was very short, and then we have to. The deadline for the submission is already closed. So, since we already have the GHG inventory, I presented to the mayor that this is this is the path. We need to set our target, our science-based target to have meaningful contribution to the country and to the global effort. And then since our mayor is also a visionary leader, he readily support, and in fact we were able to convince him to join the Race to Zero and Race to Resilience Challenge of the UNFCCC.
And I agree with Mercy that it's very important to get the political support for work, and effort must be made for that. But for some reason, every decision concerning climate issues in Turku has been unanimous, and we have got support from every party actually for our work, and maybe we have succeeded in communication of these issues, and of course the science-based is something that is in general a good thing to base your work, and so have the good knowledge background for the work, and so it's easy to accept.
Yeah, no, those are great points you're making. And perhaps I want to push you a little bit because it sounds like it has been sort of maybe an easy road, but I imagine there you have also encountered some challenges in the process of setting these targets and going on to achieve them. If you could sort of do anything differently, if you had to start again the work that you have been doing in Turku, is there anything that you would do differently in this journey? Or that you could advise other cities that are perhaps earlier in the journey to sort of do pay attention to?
Well, there are no big regrets, and it's a long path, of course, and no shortcuts perhaps, but maybe we could have been even more ambitious. But maybe the level of ambition is also good, and it's good to start from some small things and easy things, and when to move on. So the work has been changing a lot during the time I've been working with these issues. So the first solutions were quite technical, I think, and now it's more and more involving the society and that part. And so
yeah, that's a really key point. We also have been at WWF, we also work with a lot of with public engagement, and perhaps Mercy, you can also mention, because I think I don't know if you mentioned already, how has it been? Have you been able to engage citizens in the target? Well, perhaps not target setting, but sort of in the process
implementation.
Yes.
Yeah, most of our initiatives, even not related to climate change, we always encourage or engage our stakeholders. So it's not new to us. And it is in the climate work, it is very important that you have to engage the citizens, the stakeholders, because government cannot do it alone. For example, the emissions is from them. So they should know, and they should know how to reduce it.
Great. And perhaps this also leads me to another question, which is what comes next? How will the work continue, both within the administration, but also with citizens? What comes? Do you have any plans that are coming into implementation, or are you updating plans? Yeah, what is happening now in both Dipolog and Turku?
For Dipolog, our plans, our initiatives is based on the our inventory, the GHG inventory. So we plan out initiatives so as to reduce the sectoral emissions. And then the challenge now is how to get funding support from our local budget, and accessing budget from other agencies or private sector to implement our initiatives. I think this is common for local government units just like us in the Philippines. We are a third-class city in the Philippines. So we always have constraints on our financial capacity to implement programs and projects. So, yeah.
Yes, I think that is a common challenge we do see. Yeah. But Miika, you wanted to say something.
Yes, our climate work is quite holistic nowadays, and we of course are are improving our management in city administration and putting constraints for investment and budget things. That is one thing, but also more and more working with the private companies. We have this climate team concept, and there are now already more 100 actors included in that. And also we have to make the idea of 1.5 degree lifestyle tempting for the citizens, and that is one big issue. We are making services for our citizens and want to change them climate neutral or climate positive. So.
Yeah, something that we definitely need to be moving towards. Thank you for those answers. And I can see we have a question from Erik Alheim from Järfälla municipality in Sweden. And he asks, did you identify any other sector or partner except the main politics that you would like to work more with for achieving your goals? So other than governments, any other sectors or partners, yeah, that would be worth partnership or cooperating more with?
Well, of course, as Mercy mentioned, the energy issues are very important, and energy companies, of course, are very important, but also our businesses in the city. And it's very good to have ambitious and short-term target, which is easy to communicate and easy to share, and so we can say what services the city can provide, and companies can set their own targets based on that, and also offer services for a city, and so that dialogue is very important.
Yeah, Mercy, would you like to add any comments here or?
Yeah, harnessing the support of the business sector in the Philippines is a good potential, because they are required. They have corporate social responsibility. LGUs can utilize that requirement. That I don't know that, but if it is required by our Bureau of Internal Revenue, but they have that projects, they have programs like that we can use and to support our climate work.
Andrea, sorry.
Thank you. We're running a little bit out of time, but we want to, of course, engage with the participants that we have here. So we have one question from Arif in the chat from Indonesia, and I just want to invite other cities that might have questions to write them here, because even if we're not able to answer them right now, we might be able to give an answer in our follow-up email to the webinar. So maybe we have time for 2 more questions from the audience, or 1, I would say. But please, in any case, write them, any doubt that you may have.
Yeah, so I think the question from Arif was asking what sectors are being prioritized in your cities. And then there is a question about budget. I don't know if budget allocation for climate action. I don't know how much detail we can get out of you from that, but yes, I welcome you to answer as you see fit.
Well, of course, the energy sector has been during the recent years most important, but more and more mobility comes more important and also difficult sector. But I think that changing our services to carbon neutral, it's not necessarily adding cost. It in many times it saves costs, and so it's even profitable and proven already being profitable in many issues.
Yes, yeah, thank you for that, Miika. And Mercy, I think you disappeared briefly, but would you like to comment on the case of Dipolog? I think, yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't able to get the question. I was
yeah.
logged out.
Yes, Arif from Indonesia was asking what sectors are being prioritized by the city, and perhaps if you have any comments on the budget allocation that there is for climate action.
Dipolog is now prioritizing the emissions from the households because based on our inventory, a big bulk of our emission is from the use of biomass from households for fuel use. So we are formulating plans or initiatives on how to reduce the use of biomass for fuel, for cooking, and to shift to make the household use an alternative method of cooking. As to the budget, we have for the projects lined up for this year, we already have included it in our budget. But for the succeeding years, that's the challenge.
Yes, that's thank you for that. And I can see Andrea is telling me we need to move to the closing, but perhaps I just wanted to comment that from that last question that you both answered, I think it becomes also very apparent the need to have inventories about the emissions that are actually taking place within the city. So with that, I think I can pass the word to Andrea, who can give us a little bit also more information about how the next webinars might be useful also for for emissions accounting. And thank you so much again, Miika and Mercy, for these conversations. It was very insightful. And yeah, I look forward to continuing the work with you.
Thank you both, Miika, Mercy, and Gara for this very engaging panel. It was great to hear from you. And thank you everyone for joining in our webinar. I just have some final remarks to say that this webinar will be followed by follow-up material and exercises that BBF has created. It is intended for the use of BBF, of local WWF offices and cities to use for deeper understanding and interactive exercises. It is intended, however, to be used as coaching, in group-based coaching, not necessarily as per an individual city. And we will send you this material with the presentation and the slides afterwards. We are very eager to see an increase of the science-based targets in cities. So please contact your local national offices. If you have any other questions, if you don't know which your local national office is, please write us to this email that you see here. And then again, an invitation for you to join us in our One Planet City Challenge 2023-2024, as we are relaunching now in April again. So why we believe that you should join is because we will be able to give you more follow-up on your science-based target work, and you will also get feedback on your current performance and next steps. Then, of course, we aim to keep providing these opportunities for you, as it is these webinars that we are at. And so I want to invite you for the upcoming webinars that we have. which is in April 19, we will have calculating emission reductions of actions, which follows very nicely on the topic that we are in this webinar, because of course we want to see what the actions that we have, what their potential reduction is, to know if they are enough or not. And then in April 26, we invite you to join a webinar with CDP, where you will learn about how to join the different initiatives in the CDP eClay track, and you will learn as well how to join the OPCC in there. And our tech lead, Tabare, will be joining here. So again, please write us to our OPCC email that you see here in the screen. And if you want to join the webinars, you can go into our panda.org/OPCC webpage. Then click in participant information, and you will find there all the information about the webinars and also about the challenge. Thank you once again for joining us today. We will be sure to send you all the information of the webinar afterwards. And I hope you have a lovely day.